this meeting of, pardon me, I call this meeting of Millersville Borough Council to order. As a reminder to everybody, this is being live streamed, and we are called to order as of 6 o'clock p.m. At this time, I'd like to ask everybody to please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance and remain standing for a moment of silence.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Be seated. Okay, first up on today's agenda is approval of our minutes for the council meeting held on September 24th, 2024. Do I have a motion to approve those minutes?
I'll move to approve them.
Thank you, Phyllis. A second?
A second.
Seconded by Marion. Any discussion required involving the minutes from September 24th? Seeing none, all those in favor of approving the minutes for the council meeting held on September 24th, 2024, please indicate so by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Abstentions? Very well. We'll now move on to the public comment portion of the evening. At this time, council will hear any comments, requests, or concerns from members of the public related to items on the agenda or other matters. You will have 5 minutes to speak. We do ask that you please either come to the microphone or ask that the microphone be brought to you, and also give your name and a general address for the record. Very well. In that case, we will move on to the presentation of our 2023 audit. Is Ms. Gardner here? Hello.
Great, good evening everyone. So in front of you, you have a presentation that I'll be going through. It's also up on the screen for everyone. This does say draft across it. We're, after tonight's meeting, we'll work through our wrap-up procedures and get everything finalized. So once that's finalized, you will get this in a final version, as well as those final financial statements will be available electronically and printed for you. I am going to go through the presentation. Some of the areas a little quickly, just because there's no significant changes from the prior year's audit results, but please stop me if you have any questions. So I am starting on what's called page 1 in the bottom right corner, or the third paper in the document. So a few reminders about how the audit works. So we, as your auditor, are responsible for performing our audit in accordance with generally accepted auditing standards, and then forming and expressing an opinion about whether the financial statements are materially correct, fairly presented, and conform with the modified cash basis of accounting. So here's a reminder about the borough's financials, is you record things when you receive them and when you actually pay them. It's the modified cash basis of accounting, not the accrual basis of accounting. So you do not record an expense until you actually write the check and it goes out the door. You do not record revenue until you actually receive the receipts. That can sometimes mean, when you compare year over year, timing differences come into play there, as opposed to if you were on the accrual basis of accounting. So just a reminder, that's no change from prior years, but I always like to point that out. And then we are required to communicate significant matters to you about the audit directly to you, and that I'm doing this evening, and then you'll also get this updated document when it's finalized. Couple of reminders: an audit provides reasonable, not absolute assurance that the financial statements are free from material misstatement. What that means is, during 2023, the period under audit, we were not here watching everything that happened. And then when we do our audit, we don't audit 100% of the financial transactions of the borough. That would be almost impossible to do. It would be very timely and also very costly. So it's up to us to be able to design our audit to give that opinion, which I'll go into a little bit more detail in a couple pages. I also like to remind you that an audit is not an internal control. So having an audit does not relieve you, as those charged with governance, or management and staff, of their responsibilities related to any kind of controls, processes, procedures related to essentially the governance of the borough's financial transactions and reporting. On page 2, the responsibilities of the borough are preparing and fairly presenting the financial report, designing, implementing, evaluating, and maintaining effective internal controls over all aspects of the financial reporting of the borough, providing us with unrestricted access to any documentation we might need to review or any people we might have inquiries of. If there would be any fraud, illegal acts, material weaknesses, or just significant deficiencies, making us aware of those, and we were not made aware of any from management or the board during this audit period. During the time period as to, so this audit is for 2023, December 31, 2023, up through when we date the audit is called the subsequent event period. If there's something significant that changed or happened at the borough after 12/31/23 that would impact someone reading those financial statements, we would have to consider whether or not that would need to be disclosed in those financial statements. And at this point, we're not aware of any significant change that we would be disclosing. And as far as looking for subsequent events that might need to be recorded in your financials, since you're on the modified cash basis, you don't have any accrual, so we don't have to do anything as far as looking if there's any transactions that are related to one year and the other. And then all of this goes into a management representation letter, which the borough manager will sign off on when we finalize. On page 3, a little bit how the audit works. So we are required to understand the borough's internal controls. So that's the first thing we do. What are the processes, the procedures? Who is involved in those processes and procedures? It'd be really hard for us to come up with effective audit procedures if we don't understand how it is the borough's operating. Obviously, over the past couple of years, you've had some change in positions. So we take that into consideration, and then what we do is we put on our auditor hat and say what could go wrong. This is not saying that anything has gone wrong or will go wrong, but it's what we call a risk assessment. What are the areas of higher risk of maybe something going wrong? And that includes just errors or mispostings. And that's how we develop those audit procedures. We are not required to test internal controls, which we often don't do in organizations of this size. We're going to do a lot of substantive testing where we're actually sending confirmations to third parties and then looking at the supporting documentation for the transactions that are in your financial activity. We don't test everything. Materiality is the word that we use for what would be meaningful to someone if it was an error. Materiality we calculate for each fund based on its receipts. That's really the main driver of the activity of each of your funds. Is the money coming in, is then how you can operate, spend the money in the activities that you provide throughout the borough. So we're going to do a calculation for each of those funds because each of those funds is reported on. That's going to help us come up with certain thresholds. Over our largest threshold, we test everything because those are what we call material transactions. Under that threshold is where we then will do a sample of the population. If we go through and we do a test and everything looks great, there's no mispostings or anything, then we kind of move on. But say we do some testing and there's several things that maybe were posted in the wrong bucket, well then we might pull more to test just to make sure are there additional items that might need to be reclassed or put in a different bucket. So that's just kind of an example of how we go about our audit. We also are required to have what's called an element of unpredictability. So we can't test the exact same accounts, the exact same transactions, and the exact same dollar amounts every year. We have to have what's called an element of unpredictability. So each year we're going to be asking about different things during the audit process. Adjustments or journal entries are usually a part of every audit that we do. These are going to be proposed journal entries or adjustments to the accounting records of the borough. We've gone through all of the proposed entries with management, and those have already been posted to the financial transactions of the borough. Page 4, so I know this says draft, just because we haven't signed it and finalized it, but we are expecting an unmodified opinion that is a clean opinion of the borough, so that's no change from prior year. 2 thumbs up there. Page 5, I'm going to go through the next couple of pages pretty quickly because it's just the standard language that I have to touch on. We, as your auditor, have to comply with ethics requirements and are independent of the borough. As far as significant accounting policies or how you record your transactions, no significant changes to the year before. Page 6, sorry, I skipped a page. Nope, I didn't. Page 6, no difficulties encountered, no disagreements. Page 7 wraps that up with essentially anything that's required to be communicated to you as those charged with governance I'm doing here this evening, included in this presentation, and then you'll also receive as part of the final document as well. Page 8 then comes to matters of internal control. So although we're not required to test internal controls, we are required to understand your internal controls. And if we are aware of any kind of internal control deficiency that is a material weakness, the highest level, or drop down one level, not material, but still significant. We call it a significant deficiency. I am required to communicate those directly to you as those charged with governance. There is then this third layer that's called just a deficiency. We call them kind of like other matters, best practices, good ideas, etc. So if we flip to page 9, you will see, and this is actually consistent with the 2022 audit, there are 3 what we call material weaknesses in internal control. So the first material weakness in internal control is very common in organizations of your size in regards to segregation of duties. So in a best practice, perfect world, you'd be able to segregate all duties where there's not one person who, but something from happening is also a mistake. We're humans. So controls also help alleviate mistakes, and that's usually what we're dealing with. So there's preventative controls, and then there's also detective controls. So that's like a bank reconciliation. So being able to identify, oh, something was misposted, or we didn't get this deposit posted in because it was an ACH that went directly into the bank account. Those are the types of things that, just talking through how can you strengthen the controls or the procedures that you have to, as much as possible, segregate those duties. And some of that is going to rely also on the board to be involved in some of those different types of approvals, signing of checks, reviewing of financial reports, etc., which you do, but continuing to kind of strengthen those controls. The second item, material audit adjustments. So this actually was much better than 2022. Really, we only had 2 material journal entries, whereas the 2022 audit, we had a lot more. So this has decreased, and honestly, I think we're in the right direction of getting this off of that list moving forward. That just means that the number of journal entries or the amount of the journal entries that we propose materially change the financial information at the audit period. And if we think about throughout the year, you're making decisions based on the financial information that's provided to you. And if at the end of the audit, we go and make adjustments that change that financial information significantly or materially, well, then that could have had a different impact on any decisions that might have been made. So we're always looking at that. But I will say, although we have the same 3 material weaknesses from 22 to 23, there's definitely been efforts to start to alleviate or remove some of these. And then the third item, bank reconciliations. Not all accounts are being reconciled, and there has been some confusion over bank accounts aligning with which fund. I will say part of this, and this is a repeat item from 22 on the next page, part of that is just the system that you use. You have pulled cash accounts, and there's these due to, due froms that go along with a clearing fund, and so it honestly makes it very kind of confusing when you're looking at your chart of accounts where you look at cash accounts and then also have to factor in these due to, due froms that the system is using that honestly never get cleared out. And so that's one thing that we've been working on, essentially saying, hey, you could go ahead and do these adjustments to clear these items out. So when you're running a report, you can better, easily see these are the accounts that line up directly with these funds. Also making sure that any related entries on the bank side and in the general ledger side, that they're both being made and reconciled, and that items being grouped all in one for the reconciliation process as opposed to individually being reconciled. And this is something that in 2024 here, those items have definitely been, I know the borough has worked on changing the way they're doing things to check these items off and improve that going forward. So I know I always kind of deliver the not the bad news, but kind of okay, you've got this deficiency, but I do want to give credit where credit's due in making way on correcting those items going forward. I'll pause there because I know I threw a lot at you. Again, similar to 2022's audit results, but happy to take any questions before I jump into the numbers. Sure.
Not a question,
Okay.
but thank you. The idea of me reading and understanding this myself gives me a headache. So,
Well, and that's why I do it this way and not just throw financial statements at you. So I wanted to be helpful. I appreciate that. Any other questions or comments? If not, then I'm going to jump to page 10. A couple of other suggestions, and again, items that we've talked about. I think just taking a look at the accounting software and how you're currently using that, or if that's the right software for you. I honestly think making some changes to the software or changing your software package will make things a little bit more efficient for the staff. The fund account and structure analysis, taking a look at, and that goes hand in hand with that software, but looking at how the different funds are set up and talking to each other in the system, I think is one thing that might be able to help in your financial reporting. Those due to, due from accounts that we talked about, getting those cleaned up. So you have a lot of your funds are all in one cash account, which is totally fine. That's allowed to happen unless there's someone that says you have to have this money separate. An example of that is your liquid fuels fund. That has to be in its own bank account. Everything else can be pulled together in one cash account where it's earning interest and you allocate it amongst the funds. But unless you've got it set up where it's working really well in your system, it can get a little messy in your reconciliation process. So the alternative to that is having separate bank accounts for each individual fund. We've talked about that as an alternative. I'm not saying that's the way you should go or will go, but just other ways of being able to kind of make it a little bit more streamlined to help in that reconciliation process. The escrow developer activity tracking, so this actually has been corrected, but it got corrected in 2023, so we just keep it on here. But essentially what was happening is all of that developer escrow activity, so that's money coming in the door that's not really the borough's, and then it pays for expenses that's not the borough's expenses. It was previously being recorded in revenues and expenses, but now it's being recorded in a liability account because essentially it's not your money coming in and it's not the borough's expenses. Now it should all wash out. But on the modified cash basis, sometimes we have timing issues. So having that in the middle there in your accounts can muddy that up. And also it's just grossing up revenues and expenses. So if you're trying to look at trend analysis or how much you're spending on engineering, et cetera, that's just grossing up and including activity that's not really the borough's. It's someone else's that you're just holding the money on the behalf. So that has been changed. And then there were some minor discrepancies that were identified in some quarterly payroll taxes. And this was really just, it was a system issue in the payroll, but essentially it was nothing on the employee side. The employee withholding piece was all fine. It was really just a discrepancy between the payroll tax return that was recorded and what was actually paid. The amounts were very immaterial. I believe they've been corrected going forward. It was just a 2022 and 2023 issue, but just had it on here to include to make you aware of some of the things that we've discussed during the audit.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Talking about the accounting software. So now the software that we have, if I'm correct, has been there for quite a long time, correct? Have you discussed getting a different software package and did you make a recommendation?
Yes, actually that'll be a huge part of the conversation we're going to have in like 10 minutes.
We have talked about that. What's funny is I had never encountered this system before working with the borough. I know it's switching over and you're kind of being forced to make a change in one direction or another. We've kind of talked about some of the systems that I've seen and my thoughts on it, but really it just, I know you'll be getting more information on that I think you've done some demos and it really just kind of depends on what you're looking for as far as different components. But the system just seems very antiquated and no accounting system though is perfect. I will tell you that. But I think there's definitely some better solutions. All right, page 11. So I'm just going to give you a high-level overview of the financial results of 2023. So on page 11, this is just general fund, and I've given you 3 years for comparison. The left-hand column is going to be 2023, 2022 in the middle, and then 2021 on the right. I'm not going to go through each line item, but essentially to give you an idea, the revenues for 2023 were about $4.3 million. And then as you can see, I kind of give you the percentages because I feel like that's always a little bit more meaningful as far other than the dollars, but 71% of your revenues for the general fund come from taxes. 11% come from intergovernmental revenues. 6% come from interest, rents, and royalties. So just to kind of give you an idea of that breakout of revenue. So about 4.3 million in 2023, it was about 5.1 million in 2022, and then about 4.5 million in 2021. One of the biggest factors of change between 21, 22, and 23 were those ARPA funds. So ARPA funds came in 2021, they came in 2022, they're all done. You'll also see a little bit of wonkiness when you compare your sewer fund and your general fund in regards to the ARPA funds. So when your ARPA funds first came in, they came into the general fund and then they were transferred to the sewer fund because that was the original plan, was to use those funds in the sewer fund. Then as additional information came out about ARPA, because we were always learning something new every day, it was determined that you could more easily use those funds towards general operations. And the borough did make that decision to move that money back from the sewer fund to the general fund to use towards general operation costs, I think specifically police costs. So that is a little bit wonky if you go back through the past 3 years. You'll see money come in the general fund, move to sewer, then you see money move out of sewer back to the general fund, and that was really just to put it in the right bucket of where you plan to spend it. There's nothing wrong with what happened. You changed your mind, and that was totally fine. But just to point that out if you're kind of tracking those transfers back and forth. The disbursements of the general fund, you had just about $4.2 million for 2023, a little less than 2022 and less than 2021, but mainly because of that transfer out in 2021. So the end result of the general fund for 2023 was a positive $90,000. So your revenues were $90,000 more than your expenses. And at the bottom there, I did also include a little calculation of change in receipts and change in disbursements, just so you could see that. Moving on to page 12. In addition to your general fund, you do have 3 other governmental funds. You've got your capital reserve fund in blue, your park fund in green, and your highway aid or liquid fuels fund in that orangish color. Again, 3 years for you, just a little less detail, high level, 2023, 2022, and 2021. So the net result of your capital reserve fund was a use of $653,000. Again, this is going to be timing for capital projects. So this is, you're putting money into that fund and then you're using it on different projects. So you had a decrease in that fund of about $653,000 based on the projects that were happening. Your park fund, you had an increase of about $42,000 in that fund balance. And then your liquid fuels fund for the year, you had an increase of about $168,000 of that fund balance. Moving on to page 13 then, we look at your enterprise or proprietary funds. These are your funds that act like mini businesses of the borough. The one in blue at the top is going to be your sewer revenue and sewer capital. You report those together. The one in green is going to be your solid waste or your trash fund, and then the one in orange is that educational service agency fund or your crossing guards fund. Again, 23 on the left, 22 in the middle, 21 on the right. For 2023, you had a decrease in your sewer revenue and capital fund of about $238,000. You had an increase in the solid waste fund of about $9,000. And then your crossing guard fund, you had a decrease of about $3,000. And again, that's just the difference between receipts of those funds and the disbursements of those funds. Wrapping all of that up then on page 14 to just give you a snapshot of your cash balances of each fund. Just a reminder, this is a day in time. So these balances were 12/31/2023. The very next day, something changed, whether it was interest or a check got cashed, something cleared, etc. But just to give you an idea of those cash balances, because your modified cash basis, cash really is your fund balance. You don't have any receivables, any capital assets, or any liabilities on your books. So really the cash balance is your fund balance. I am saying cash, you do have a couple investment accounts, but essentially they're all considered cash and cash equivalents for the most part. So your general fund ended the year of about $2.75 million. Your general capital reserve fund about $1.3 million. The park fund, that's that rudder investment of about $445,000. And your liquid fuels fund of about $418,000. Total governmental funds of $4.9 million. The second part there, those proprietary funds, that sewer revenue and capital fund together, $2.7 million. The solid waste fund of about $507,000, and then that crossing guards fund of about $12,000. So total proprietary funds of $3.2 million. Just a reminder, the proprietary funds really can only operate within their own funds, so you can't take solid waste funds and move it to the general fund. They've got to stay in there because that's a service type fund. And same thing, your liquid fuels funds, we know that they're restricted. The park fund is also restricted based on that activity. And then really once you move things into your general capital, you're not supposed to move them back out. And that's where having a capital projects plan is really important. But total cash of the borough of about $8.13 million as of 12/31/23. I will stop there. I know I threw a lot of information at you. Tried not to go too quickly, but also wanted to make sure that I didn't use too much of your time because I know you've got some fun budget discussions, but happy to take any questions on the financials.
Thank you. Like we have any. So
All right.
we'll thank you for your time.
You're very welcome. I'll leave this with you because it's an extra copy. Oh, okay. All right, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Gardner.
All right,
right, very well. We'll move on next to our committees, starting with Finance Advisory Committee. I will begin by taking roll as the chair of that committee. Phyllis Giverson?
Here.
Marion?
Here.
Very good. And Marianne. There we go. Looks like the only item we have on here is a review of our 2025 agenda. We've all had our appetites whetted by the last presentation, so I'd like to take it away.
Yes. All right. Well, I'm pleased to present to Council a proposed draft of the 2025 budget, which you received on Friday. The budget is a relatively lengthy document. This year's is around 45 pages so far. So for the Finance Committee meeting, we will take some time to offer some highlights of the borough's general fund, which is our 01 fund this evening. And then at the committee meeting on Thursday, we'll go over highlights from the other funds because the general fund is our biggest and longest. We will stop after each section to answer questions. So just a reminder of where we are. We started budget prep all the way back in June. We're hitting the home stretch now where committees this evening will be reviewing their particular budget sections before it would go off for advertising. So just as a quick reminder of where we are. So as we've talked about in our preliminary conversations about the budget will serve both as a financial management tool and as a policy document. We do a combination of line item budgeting, zero-based budgeting, and incremental budgeting here in the borough. And our aim at the end of the day is to have a balanced budget. That means that our total anticipated revenue meets or exceeds planned expenditures. Ideally, we want to avoid a budget deficit or using our fund balance to cover expenditures. That would help us to avoid a structural deficit, meaning that there's not enough money to cover our recurring or emergency expenses. As you will notice in the proposed budget, we are currently looking at a deficit for the budget year 2025 in the general fund, which will need to be remedied through two options: increase of revenue, decrease in expenditures, ideally a combination of both. As you may have already read in my budget introduction letter, I offered a few recommendations to council on how I think that we should tackle this gap, and we will continue that conversation throughout tonight's presentation. So this evening, we are going to review our general fund revenues. We're going to review the administrative and legislative section of the general fund, the police section of the general fund, the community service section of the general fund, code and zoning section, streets and parks, and we'll end talking about health insurance. So starting out with revenues. On this slide, you will see a snapshot of some of the revenue account lines in the budget. This is not all of them. Our largest source of income is our property taxes. That should be no surprise to anyone. On page 23 of the proposed budget, you will find an explanation of how we get to that number, that $2,029,468 number. And then on page 24 of the proposed budget, you will see a graph showing our millage rate over time. The borough's last significant tax increase was in 2019, followed by a small increase in 2022. Also not a surprise to anyone, significant inflation in the post-COVID years has certainly taken a hit on everyone. And we are seeing our current tax rate fall short of covering all of the borough's services. I can also turn your attention to the millage rate breakdown document that was provided with all of your budget documents this evening. That document shows potential tax increases for 2025 at different millage rates. I ask council to seriously consider these numbers carefully. No one likes a tax increase, but the cost of services continues to climb and reliance on our fund balance is just not sustainable. I also list on this slide other significant sources of revenue, such as the EIT, the Earned Income Tax, the LST, that's a local service tax, our pilot
rent, and a number of others. Items like zoning permits, code violations, building permits, those are budgeted based off of what we believe will be the activity in 2025. With developments such as Winfield at Millersville and Crossgates Phase 2, adding a few homes likely over the next year, we expect some revenue, but not as much as was budgeted for 2024. We're going to circle back to the conversation specifically about fees. And I just also wanted to note here, you'll see the last line item here under contributions and donations. That $8,000 is to represent the Hometown Hero Banner project. While we of course hope that that would be a net zero type of project where the money that we would take in for applications is the money that would pay for the banners themselves, we do have to account for it in the budget. So we're accounting for it in contributions and donations as revenue, and then you'll see it as an expenditure under, I believe it's under cultural activities. Let me pause it and see if there's any questions.
Yeah, so your line for interest earnings, is that taking into account your proposed investment structure from previously that we haven't yet circled back to?
Yes and no. It does take it into account for the sake of the general fund, but you will notice on all of our funds, there's its own separate interest line. So that would be more accounted for in things like the general capital fund, the sewer capital fund, and those other funds.
And interest accumulated in the general capital fund wouldn't be considered as part of our revenue for the year?
I'm looking at just revenue for general fund. So we can't necessarily think about interest overall, we have to think about it per fund. So this is just representing interest earnings that we expect just in 01, just in the general fund.
I have a couple questions.
Yes.
Looking at reimbursement from non-uniform pension, why did that go down so much? From 70,000 in the 2024 budget to 37 something.
That's, yes. So I do not intend to point fingers or say anything bad about what's been done in the past. I will just remark that I think there were some errors made in last year's budget. I believe that number should have been like more like 7,000, and I think an additional digit was added in.
Okay. Well,
Because
if it
that
should have
didn't
been
make-
7,000, then this is a significant increase. I'm looking at the reimbursement. I assume that's you have pension system state aid, which remained the same. No.
So pension system state aid, that number is determined by the state. We get exactly
Right,
whatever the
right.
state tells us.
Well, then what is this reimbursed non-uniform pension?
Oh, I'm
This
so
is-
sorry. Let me explain that
Okay,
one.
is this the non-uniform people paying into their pension? Because they
No,
don't.
this is actually, so this money comes from our 08, our sewer fund, and our 09, our solid waste fund. So when payroll occurs, certain numbers of us on staff, our salaries and our benefits and things like pension come out of 01, 08, and 09 because we're working in all
Got
of
it.
those funds.
Yeah, it's very complicated.
Yes.
Mhm.
So because of that, and because we can't necessarily treat that all as one bucket of money, we actually have to have the 08 and 09 funds reimburse 08 for paying that part of the
I
pension.
do understand.
Does that make sense? Okay. So that one specifically is, I don't know why they put 70,000 last year. That is not the
Wasn't
number.
realistic. The other thing is the real estate taxes are down slightly. Is there a reason for that? Did we lose a couple of houses or something?
Not necessarily, but it is important to remember that not everyone always
Pays their
pays.
taxes. Mhm.
So that's why you see things like delinquents
But
and
your
prior
budget-
years.
I know, but your budget for delinquent taxes is down from the year before.
It's up slightly. It's up by just a couple thousand.
Wait, maybe I'm not.
Oh, okay.
24.
Got
Sorry,
it,
make sure
got
you're
it,
looking
got
at the
it,
furthest
got
end.
it. No, I
That makes
understand,
sense?
I
Okay.
understand. Okay.
I know, I was like,
following
wait a minute, oh my
everything.
goodness.
Fine.
Yes, no.
Mhm.
But yes, not everybody takes it.
Okay, thank you.
The other question I have is, these are revenues now.
Mhm.
So cable television franchise, what kind of contract is that on, the 90,000?
So we have contracts with a couple of the cable franchise companies here so that they can operate here in the borough.
Right, but, I mean, how long is the contract?
Oh, each one of them is different. I can get that information
Well,
for
no.
you.
The only reason I'm asking is because like the rent for the water tower,
Mm-hmm.
cable TV doesn't mind going up for the individual purchaser. So
Sure.
can this fee be raised for these individual?
So we
companies?
have, with each one, we do have a contract. Same thing for the rents of the water tower. We have a contract. I will say they're very long contracts.
Oh,
So
okay.
like for some of them, it's like 10 to 15 years.
Yeah, okay.
The only one that's currently coming up is our T-Mobile contract for water tower rent. And that will be coming up next year.
Well, let's rob them.
Okay.
Really? Let's negotiate that one.
Got it.
All right.
Take a note.
The payments in lieu of,
Yes.
who's eligible for that and who actually pays that?
It's a good question. So right now, in terms of the formal agreements that we have a payment in lieu of agreement with Student Lodging Inc. And then we have others that come in. Really, anybody who feels so moved to pay us a payment in lieu of tax if they're a nonprofit is absolutely welcome to do so. We welcome donations.
University is one.
Yes and no, because we have different agreements with them. They don't necessarily fall into the pilot category because they're not necessarily a nonprofit. Really, any nonprofit who takes it upon themselves to say, I recognize that we are exempt from paying taxes, but we'd like to pay our fair share. We get a handful of churches every year. The big one, though, that we tend to think of when we think of the pilot that happens here in the borough is the one that we get from student lodging. So that makes up, honestly, almost that entire amount.
From where did you say? From where?
Student
Student
lodging.
lodging.
From student lodging?
Yeah.
A couple of other things, on page 25 at the top.
Mhm.
Parking permits, I don't know if that figure is accurate for 2024, $89,400.
There was absolutely an extra zero added last year because there's
Well, there's also building permits that were up considerably.
Yeah.
I think so. As I mentioned, for some of those ones like the building permits, what are the other ones that fall through the cat going? Zoning permits, things like that. It's kind of what we anticipate is going to happen. There was an anticipation that things like Winfield and Crossgates would have moved much faster. We expected to be bringing in more permits from that construction. So we're being a little bit more conservative for next year, knowing that they're just moving at a slower pace than I think we
And
had.
what were you thinking with $150,000 of miscellaneous revenue?
And that was for,
Did I look at that wrong? Miscellaneous revenue.
no, that's what it says.
I think I'm looking at it correctly. It was, in 2023, it was $48,804 and zero. In 2024, and $150,000 in the budget draft for 2025.
Give me 1 second to just pull that one up.
Sure.
I'm not remembering what our intended number was.
That's a pretty big miscellaneous.
Yeah.
First proposal.
It's wishful thinking, maybe.
What? That too. Let's see, miscellaneous revenues. I'm gonna have to follow up with you on that one. I think the reason is that for September, as of the end of September 30th, we have brought in a decent amount so far of miscellaneous revenue. The 1 year that we brought in a significant amount, 2022, we brought in $200,000 that year of miscellaneous revenue.
Where would that come from?
So for the most part, it's miscellaneous items, copies, reimbursements, escrows, veteran brick purchases. Escrows used to be done out of there, but as you heard from the auditor, we don't do that anymore, so that's likely why that's going to be reflected there.
Except it's not really income to us. Escrow isn't.
Right, which is why we don't account for escrow in a revenue fund anymore.
Right.
But that's,
this
I
is
think,
$150,000 of
I think
miscellaneous income.
I'm believing that this is probably just a mistake of a typo. So because we're doing about 16,000 this year, I think that should probably be 15,000.
I was just wondering.
I'm gonna make that change right now.
What is in that category of miscellaneous revenue?
Yeah, dog fees, copies, reimbursements, escrows, veteran payments. There are
escrows,
I'm sorry.
but not escrows.
Not escrows anymore. The Department of Community Development and Economic Development for the state actually has a limit on to how much boroughs and townships can have in miscellaneous revenue, because really miscellaneous revenue is intended for the things that just really don't have a spot. But for the most part, we have a wonderful chart of accounts that does have a spot for most of everything. If Krista was still here, she would tell you that if you tried to submit a DCED financial report and it had miscellaneous revenues over a certain percentage, it would bounce back and say you cannot submit this financial report. So
I mean, you can get away with putting it down. I just was wondering.
No, I'm almost 100% sure that was a mistake.
Okay.
So I've changed that.
Okay.
I have a question about the next item on there, which is contributions and donations.
Yes.
500 to 0 to 8,000. What constitutes the contributions and donations that we're expecting that much?
That's, as I said before, that's the Hometown Heroes project. We have
That's
to account
going to be
for it
that, and
somewhere.
that's where we've put it. Okay.
We have really no other good way to account for it, besides making our own line, which I don't love the idea of doing. So that's where we accounted for the money coming in.
Just wanted to be sure that was right.
Other revenue related questions? Okay. All right, so moving on to the next slide. Thank you very much. So now we're going to go through each department and talk about some highlights from this year and then some highlights from the 2025 budget. So as you all know, I started as your new borough manager in December of 2023, and I stepped into a financially healthy borough that was, however, going through a time of instability due to staffing transitions. My goal starting out as your manager in 2024 was to move the borough to a more stable place, particularly on the side of our workforce, our organization, and our compliance. With some significant retirements in all departments, we worked very hard this year to recruit and fill 7 critical positions with qualified individuals who will hopefully bring many years of service to the borough. And I just want to emphasize 7. It was a significant lift this year to hire and fill positions. And I thank all staff who helped make that happen, because it was quite the lift this year. We replaced our entire security system to ensure a safe and secure borough, and our building, for all who use it. We facilitated a grant award from the County Commissioner's Office for our stream restoration project. We completed the 2022 audit and got that all finished up, and we're nearly complete with the 2023 audit, as you heard this evening. Both of those do take a significant amount of staff time and effort. So again, I thank my staff for that. We bid and awarded the trash and recycling contract. That is something that also took a good amount of time and effort, and council approved that at the last meeting. We held our first ever employee wellness lunch using the resources from our healthcare broker. I'll talk more about healthcare at the end of the presentation today, but We are very lucky to be with a wonderful organization, the IIC, the Intergovernmental Insurance Cooperative, with a number of other boroughs and townships, both in Lancashire and York counties. And because of our collective resources, we're able to get basically what they call loyalty credits from Highmark, which is our healthcare provider, and they give us money to do wellness activities in the borough. And this year we held our first ever wellness lunch as an opportunity to find ways to bring down our claims costs by promoting wellness within our staff. We created a number of new office efficiencies and new standard operating procedures. This year, we supported council in the passage of 21 resolutions and 5 ordinances, and that's just so far this year. And we re-engaged the borough in things like the IIC, as I just mentioned, and the LCBA, the Lancashire County Boroughs Association. You can go to the next slide. So highlights that you will see in the 2025 budget for the administrative and legislative section of the budget. The first one that you'll see listed there on your screen, the NOVA for cybersecurity training for all staff and elected officials. As everyone knows, cybersecurity is increasingly important, especially as our ability to get spammed and get junk email and all of those things continues to increase. This is a relatively low cost, but something that I wanted to point out as a really important step that we can take to ensure that we are continuing to make cybersecurity a priority here in the borough, and as we make technological changes. We are in an unfortunate situation currently where a number of our computers are very much past their expiration date and won't function on Windows at the close of next year. And I will be 100% honest with you that I believe this particular issue was avoidable. However, over the last couple of years, there have been very few replacements of computers here in the borough. And so now we're in a position where we have 5 that are not going to be usable next year. My goal in the future is, instead of having to do these large groups of increases of doing replacements, that we can just be steadily replacing equipment as it expires to avoid these sort of hard-hitting moments. As we've talked about already, the Hometown Hero Banner project, ideally net neutral, but it does have to be listed somewhere. So on the expense side, it's listed in administration. The big one that has certainly come out of my experience so far with both the 2022 and the 2023 audits, as well as our day-to-day work in the borough, is our accounting, our permitting, and our utility billing software. Our current system for permitting and utility billing is called Freedom Systems. They were bought this year, very much unexpectedly, and the system is going to be phased out. So we're forced to make a change in 2025. After considering a number of options, having many conversations with our auditing firm, looking at some demos, trying to understand really what's going to be best for the borough, we see value in a system that integrates all 3, accounting, permitting, and utility billing in one system. And I was just as upset about the costs, as probably you are. The upfront costs are certainly steep. I don't deny that at all. Part of it is we're running out of options. Part of it is that there are massive benefits to an upgrade like this, including some significant resident efficiencies and the ability for self-service, some major staff efficiencies and reduction in costs on things like IT issues and fixes that have to be made by our IT firm to use these systems. A project like this would, of course, be split among our 01, 08, 09 accounts, as they're used by admin, code, sewer, and solid waste funds. So that is a significant project that we'll be looking at for next year. Payroll is another one. We, as you heard Krista say, we're using an incredibly antiquated system right now that is 100% manual, incredibly prone to errors and IT issues and us dealing with having to fix them. Moving to a software that is modern and also having a system, using a system of the company that actually runs the payroll and then pays the taxes will save us time, but ensure much more accurate payrolls and really improve our employee experience as well as our financial statements. As we're going to talk about a little bit, I'm not going to talk about it too much here. We're going to come back to talking about the healthcare costs. And something that I'm very excited about for next year, because it'll lead to a reduction in costs, is the establishment of a certified safety committee. If we establish a certified safety committee here in the borough, that leads to a 5% reduction in our workers' comp insurance, which is a pretty significant payment that we pay. So before we move on, any questions about anything in the administrative legislative department?
Who's our IT company currently?
The company is called Citium. They're a local IT company. They are honestly fabulous.
Just wondering, because some companies do offer that they monitor your equipment, and as part of your monthly billing, that they actually come in and replace all that stuff.
Yes, so they do all of that and more. I mean,
Okay.
as you will see, I mean, they're a pretty significant chunk in our budget line for equipment and service contracts. But they're the ones who help us figure out which equipment is expiring, what can't be used, what can be used, so on. They're the ones who have helped us, and they send me wonderful reports to say, here's where your equipment is, here's when it's expiring, all of that. They're the ones, probably if Citium was here, they would say, actually, Rebecca, you need to tell them to replace like 99% of the computers. But that's not a possibility. So I am putting forward the ones that are not going to be usable after next year by their recommendation of which ones will not convert to Windows 11 is the issue.
We have to buy the equipment, but
Yes.
they'll maintain it for us.
Yes, they maintain it all for us. We pay like a monthly service fee for them to be able to service all of our equipment, to track everything. They're our cybersecurity monitor as well. They're essentially like if we had our own in-house IT department, but in this case we have them. Any other questions? Okay, so in that case, Chief, I'm going to call you up to do your section next.
All right, for us, the highlights for 2024 were the hiring of 2 new officers after they completed the police academy, and then we had 2 retirements this year, so then we hired again, and we've just now hired the 2 additional with Act 120. Then we had the police secretary retire, so we hired and filled that position. We had some technology improvements, and I guess this was just for fun that I did do the work to research the history of the department and put the nice display up out there, because it bothered me that I've been here this long and was never able to put it all together, so now it's there. And then moving on for the highlights, really the only main highlight moving forward for next year, other than what Rebecca already mentioned, is the 5 desktop computers that are not going to be usable. A lot of that's due to the fact that when we brought Citium on board, that year when we brought them on board, we replaced all of the computers on the police side at once. So that's what's going to happen. They're all going to go at the same time. So that's just a result of that. In between there, some of the other ones had problems. That's why they're not all going at the same time, because it's not a guarantee the computer's going to last the same length of time. But five of them did continue on to this point and will no longer be usable. So the biggest thing you'll see here is for next year, I put in, this says new police officer, and I'll have to clarify that a little bit. What I asked for and put in the numbers that I submitted was to return to the number 13 officers. We've had 13 officers since 2014 is when we were first approved to increase to 13 officers. Now the reason why this isn't just why didn't we fill this other position, it's a little tricky. From 2014 until 2021, we maintained 2 positions that were reimbursed, an SRO position and someone continuously was at the drug task force. So what that means is out of 13, we budgeted for all 13, but we got reimbursed for 2 of those. So we only felt the effects of 11. Now that was till 2021, and problems happened at the drug task force. We brought the 13th officer back, and that was not reimbursed for 10 months of 2021. The issue went away in 2022 because that's the year of all the destruction to the police department when we just started losing bang, bang, bang. January of 2022, we lost our first officer, so it became a moot point that 13th officer was there and was no longer at the task force and being reimbursed. So that's where this gets a little tricky. So basically what we found, and we knew at that time when we asked to bring them back from the task force, is with our call volume increases and the types of calls that the police department had been handling, plus the effects of COVID and call-offs, vacations, etc., we needed that 13th position, and it proved itself because with an overlapping shift, with an odd number officer, that gave us 9 patrol officers. So we had two platoons of 8, or one each of 4, which was 8. That officer was able to overlap those 2 platoons, and we were fully functional in case there were events of any call officer short shifts on those platoons. We've never gotten back to that. So by asking to go back to 13 and not having someone at the task force, that means there will not be a reimbursement. That will mean the borough's budget will see the impact of 12, if you follow that. That's why technically you're saying new here. It's not really new. We've had 13 full-time officers, but the budget would feel that without someone at the drug task force, they would feel that actually 12 person because we still have the SRO. So out of the 13, only 1 of them will be reimbursed any funds, and that's from the school. We won't have someone at the task force, but I need that person now with the call volume increases that we've had. And in the future, if now that we have 5 new officers hired, someone takes interest in the drug task force again, I won't be able to send someone out there. And if you look at the benefit of the training and experience, you're looking at it, starting from me down, everyone that moves up in our department that always has spent at least 5 years out there getting that experience. I was there for 5 years, the lieutenant was there for 5 years, both sergeants were there for 5 years. If I get that interest again, I will not be able to put an officer out to the drug task force. So this all goes together with why I'm trying to get back to this number of 13. And then the last thing is just what we've done as standard practice for probably at least 15 years now, which is through our rotation of our 5 vehicles. When we're at full staff, we've learned over time, if we replace 1 new vehicle each year, they're at the mileage where we get ahead instead of go behind with repairs to vehicles. By the time we get to that 5th vehicle, the mileage is 80 to 90,000. So that's the rotation we're on, is replacing, getting rid of the oldest police car with replacing 1 new police car each year in the fleet. That's what that's reflecting there with the replacement of the 2017 is the oldest cruiser. That's it.
Questions for the chief? Thank you, sir.
section of the general fund to discuss is the community service section. This is the section of the budget where you could think of them as contributions or donations that the Borough Council decides to make to these various groups you see on here. Some of these are not optional. Well, one of them is not optional. I will go through them to give a little bit more information. The first one, emergency alert services. This is our rave alert system. That's the texting, phone call, email system that we use to get alerts out. That is just a flat yearly fee that we pay. The borough's contribution to the local fire company is the second one you see on there, Blue Arc Regional Fire District. Per our agreement with them, we base the increase on the CPI, the Consumer Price Index percentage increase in August of the year before. So we calculated that number by looking at August 2024's increase percentage. I have not received any other ask from the fire company, so due to that fact, I've only put in here what the CPI increase was based on the agreement that we have with the fire district. So that's where that number comes from. The state funds for the Firemen's Relief Association, this is not optional. This is something that we're required to do by state law. The state passes funds through us, through the Firemen's Relief Association. Basically, state sends us money that comes from fire insurance, and we take that money and then we immediately send it out to our local fire relief association, which is Blue Rock. So we don't have, there's no option on that, and the state tells us exactly what that number is. So this year the number is $40,099. The borough's contribution to the county library, their ask, as you heard I believe a few weeks ago, was $3,000 for this year. That is the same that was requested of us last year. So that's what's been placed into the budget. The contribution to the local ambulance company, last year for the county library was slightly under that. Now they've asked for an even three. The contribution to the local ambulance company, this is for LEMSA. You saw in your backup two letters a letter and some reports that came from LEMSA. They will also be in attendance at Thursday's Finance Committee meeting to formally present their request. They have requested $20,000. I didn't feel 100% comfortable putting $20,000 into the budget, so I have matched last year. I have placed last year's number in there. That is 100% up to council's discretion, how, if you'd like to put in a different number, but I just wanted you to know that is the request in that letter, and that's what they will be asking for on Thursday evening.
I have a suggestion. This came from Blue Rock.
No, this came from LEMSA.
No, I'm making a suggestion and a statement.
Sorry.
This is coming from Blue Rock, from the fire department. We discussed this EMS situation at the last meeting. They are recommending that we reduce the amount that goes to EMS because they're leaving this area. They're moving out of Millersville, and that a portion of that go to the loft because the loft is supporting feeding a lot of people in this community, which is immediate. So that recommendation is coming from the fire department. And so I wanted to make that comment. Another thing, there will be an increase coming up in 2025 because Dwayne was discussing that, because there's going to be a new building, and they're in the process right now of getting everything together, which means that it won't be ready till 26 or 27, but to be anticipating that there will be a raise in that.
Just to go on the record, if they want a new building, I think they should be prepared to justify why.
No problem.
Okay.
He will.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm just doing an FYI. And the thing is, on the suggestion with the EMS, they are aware that the EMS building is in the process of being sold to the loft. So the loft will be moving into the EMS building somewhere along the next 6 months. So the recommendation was to take some of the money that's going into the EMS and to pay that into the loft. So it's just a suggestion.
They might be moving out of the area, but they still serve us.
No, I understand
So
that.
that to take, I mean, $3,000, $20,000 is ridiculous, I totally get that. But the $3,000, to take more out of $3,000.
No, I understand,
Is
but
a little.
that was
I think
just,
that's a little
that was
crazy.
recommended, and one of the reasons given is that there will be a delay in the time now with EMS coming and serving the community, that's
They're
all.
still
Well,
serving the community.
And I just want to clarify too, they are not leaving the borough. As they'll present on Thursday, they're not leaving the borough, they're just moving from one building to another building, but they are not leaving the borough.
No, I understand that. They are leaving the building in the borough.
And so is the fire company.
Yeah.
So that,
No, the fire department is staying. Millersville Station will stay there. There will be 3 locations, so there will be 2 locations, and then there will be a merger of 2. So there will be 3 locations. So Millersville Fire Department is not leaving in staying in Millersville. The EMS building, EMS will no longer be located in that building. They will be in a new location, is all I'm saying. And that new location will just mean that for them to provide service to Millersville, and I'm not saying they won't, but I'm just saying that there will be a delay of, 5 to 10 minutes is all.
Well, that's something that when we get ready to adopt the budget, we can have out. Now, it's, you've got quite a bit to go through, and it's already after 7, so I would suggest you get to it.
The final number on there is just other contributions. That is usually to set aside money to provide to the Red Rose Honor Guard for the Veterans Ceremony. Just wanted to provide a couple of highlights for codes and zoning, as you're probably all aware, because of the fact that we went from having an in-house code enforcement officer to using CCIS. We don't pay for things like salary or benefits for a code enforcement officer, but what we do pay for are things that have to do with administering codes. So this gives you an idea on here of just what we've been doing this year in terms of code enforcement. This is as of September of 2024. I just want to note a couple of things. In 2023, we did 74 permits in total. Already by September of this year, we've already surpassed that by 10. We're already up to 84 issued permits for this year. So just to show our permit numbers really are increasing. And our inspection numbers are also as well. We have typically around 1,300 rentals in the borough, all inspected annually. We've already done 882 inspections this year. This is a good time just to mention one thing, and this is going to be probably a longer conversation at the Thursday meeting. But another item that I provided for you for the budget conversation was a printout of our fee schedule. While the borough by law cannot certainly make money on our fees, they do exist to offset the cost of providing those services and upkeeping facilities. It's generally a good practice for council to take a look at these fees on a yearly basis to see where there may be changes needed. It's important that all residents don't necessarily foot the bill for a few residents who may be renting a pavilion or having a rental. In the document that I provided, I highlighted some fees that I think would be worth considering a change to for 2025, and 2 additions, specifically adding of a rental license reinspection fee. Right now, we do not charge. If our code enforcement officer has to go out and re-inspect because they failed their rental inspection, we do not charge. That is relatively unheard of.
Right.
Seems ridiculous.
Especially when you think about the amount of time that it usually takes for Rob to have to go out and do a re-inspection. It's usually not a 15-minute trip. So I would highly recommend that we consider having a re-inspection fee. Right now you'll see on there that we have a re-inspection fee if they have to come back another time. But for the most part, Rob has to go back at least once. We don't charge for that. And as recommended in the ordinance passed around short-term rentals, council does need to decide what they want to charge for that permit. The fee schedule can simply be passed as a resolution with the budget, so something to consider when we do the adoption of the budget. All right, so 2 sessions left, promise. I'm going to call Kyle now to give a brief overview of streets and parks.
Good evening. So just some highlights from this past year. We did 27 ADA ramps. Project was completed on time and under budget. The company was great to work with. They were very knowledgeable and they were not afraid to ask questions, so they were very easy to work with. Obviously, I took over the street superintendent position, and we also hired another maintenance worker 1. Like she had pointed out, I'd like to say thank you to all the staff because they helped the transition go very well. Had a large patch that needed done on East Frederick Street, and we got that done before college came back in. Limited spending on snow removal and salt, obviously due to not having as much snow as we usually do. And we're expecting to have the park master plan completed by December of '24, hopefully. So highlights for next year, for the budget next year. The intersection at 741 and 999, I'd like to have the crosswalks done in the thermoplast. It's a thicker material, lasts longer. We don't have to go out there every year to, to maintain it. And that was $8,000. I have 2 shop doors on the newer shop over here that the bottoms, they're rusted out. They're almost 30 years old, so they're due for replacement. And I'd like to purchase a new, it'd be a utility body truck, and we would trade in the Envoy, which they use at the park, and we would keep the oldest truck we have and give that to the park. That way he has a truck and not a SUV. Traffic signal upgrades it's right now the intersections, when you pull up on them, there's a loop in the road. Sometimes it detects people, sometimes it doesn't. They're a maintenance nightmare. If somebody has to dig in the street and they dig that up, it's costly to replace that. So I'd like to upgrade that to radar detection that is all above, and then it would get rid of all those traffic loops. And then obviously for the park, phase 1, $412,000. That was anticipating a 50% match from grant funding. And then my paving next year, I would like to do Cottage Avenue from George to her Avenue. And then her Avenue from Cottage up to Circle. And then Circle Road from her to the cul-de-sac. Have those 3 roads done this year. With the ADA ramps all done, now I can do what we needed to do for a long time, but with waiting for the school to be done with their project, and Cottage Avenue is now definitely due to pave and make that a better road for the community. Any questions?
The last item that we'll talk about this evening related to the general fund is everybody's favorite health insurance renewal conversation. You're probably thinking this is maybe not that big of an item to talk about, but it's a significant part of our general fund because this and salaries are our largest, what we consider contractual obligations, as in it's written into our 2 union contracts that benefits and salaries have to be paid. So we don't have a lot of flexibility with these numbers. As a reminder, we are part of the IIC, as I mentioned before. Our benefit administrator is Benecon, if you've heard us talk about them. And we are a self-funded program. Right now, we are on track for a 5% surplus return for 2024. And that means because of the fact that we are a self all of our claim money that we put aside for the year, that we get it back as a surplus. So we're doing well this year so far. Now, we still got a couple months to go, but we're doing okay. As we found out last week from Benecon, our 2025 renewal increase will be 10%. The average increase all across the IIC, so all of the municipalities in Lancaster and York, was about 10.6, so we're basically right on average. Our annual maximum cost for claims will be just a little bit over $1 million. One of the great things about being with the IIC and working through Benecon is the fact that 97% of the costs that we pay as the borough for health insurance go directly to our claim fund. So we very much really spend most of the money just on claims. Less than 3% of it goes to administrative costs, and actually this year our administrative costs went down. I'll note that our last year increase was 18%, so this is a happy change. Last year, because it was over 14%, we had to discuss with both of our collective bargaining units a special arrangement for employee contributions for this year. Because the change is under 14% per the CBA for the police officers, they will return to not paying an employee contribution. And then per the CBA for our non-uniform and management staff, they will pay $30 for single coverage and $50 for family coverage for 2025. And the last thing I just want to say is there are a couple of items that are in the budget right now as hold numbers because we have not gotten the final number. This is not a surprise. All of these things we typically get at the end of October. We will find out what our property and liability insurance renewal is going to be. We'll find that out at the end of this month. We will also find out what our workers' compensation insurance renewal is going to be. And something that we will talk about in the personnel committee is the crossing guard question. So it's written into the budget right now of status quo, but that obviously could change things. So that is where we are right now with the general fund proposal. And we will talk about all the other funds that there's this time. Any questions?
If so, they can wait.
Please. Yeah, anyway.
I know that's a
We
lot of
will be moving
information.
on to the Personnel Advisory Committee. If they are ready.
We're ready for personnel now, Mike.
Okay, Personnel Advisory Committee will take roll. We've got Miss Linda, Miss Mary Ann, and Mr. Mike, and myself. And we're gonna, she was talking about the crossing guards. So what we have to present, I believe everybody remembers we are having problems with having, maintaining the crossing guards. It does fall back on our police department, which unfortunately is not a good thing because we're already short on police staff and then they have to man some of the areas. So we had looked into hiring a company that would take care of that. So right now, it's budgeted at $52,453. And it would go up to $71,158 in 2025 if we hire a company versus pay our own. So, is there any discussion or anything on that?
That part's okay, and I see where Penn Manor would pay half the cost. And we've pretty much done it that way before. I would only suggest that Penn Manor also sign the contract.
Let me check into that.
You might want to check with Joselle on that.
Yeah,
Jeff?
Yeah.
You have a thought on that?
No, I just would make one comment. At the rate we're going, that 50,000 is not accurate because you're paying for 2 police officers, including me, which make a lot more than $15 an hour.
Oh, I don't have any problem with the price.
I'm just adding that in, that number is not even gonna be accurate when you think about the 2 police officers that have been covering these posts since the beginning of
Oh,
this
yeah,
school.
yeah.
They're doesn't affect us as much, but the school's 50% is 50% of the officer's rate and my rate now at this point for the last over a month. So,
But I would have you check with Joselle, because it may be prudent to hold them accountable too by signing the contract.
and I would just mention one other thing. We provide radios to these guards, which we're gonna end up replacing soon. They're up to $5,000 a piece for 4 of
Yikes.
those. If the company takes over, that expense goes away.
Right.
So there's some other savings to show you the difference between that 50 and 70.
Where are we on hiring a company to do this job?
That's what we have,
So-
that's what this, hey, go ahead.
Yeah, do you want me to explain what you have? So in front of you this evening, you have the Crossing Guard Services LLC proposal, and then the most recent agreement. You also received in your backup a letter from the solicitor with her recommendations on the agreement. And Crossing Guard Services LLC was able to turn it around pretty quickly. So that's why you have it in front of you this evening. It wasn't in the backup because I got it today. So that agreement, they have made the edits that were recommended by the solicitor. I will have to go back about the question about the school district though. But at this point, if council is interested in moving forward with that contract, certainly you all could vote to bring it out of committee this evening. From their proposal, we're looking at a probably 4-week time where they would have to get up and running and get hiring and everything, giving the first right of refusal to our current crossing guards. But they are, I just talked with them today, they're essentially ready when we are, so to speak. It just obviously has to go through the process of signing of a contract.
I make a motion that we adopt this contract.
I'll second that with the provision that we check to see that Penn Manor also signs the contract.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? And any abstaining?
I will keep you all updated as then we continue on getting that agreement to a final place for council to vote on.
Okay.
And that, oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, no.
I just want to note as well, so I think we talked about this very briefly last time, but if all goes to plan and we're able to do this contract with them, we would then also be probably wanting around that same time for council to discuss sunsetting our educational service agency as they will be no longer necessary.
Sunsetting, I've never heard that term.
Yeah,
What a nice way of putting it. Right off into the sunset.
we'll try to not say we're going to fire the educational service agency. You know, that's not nearly as fun. So that would just be a change then that council could do by resolution.
Okay, and then we're going to consider the part-time employees' 2025 salaries that everybody gets. Is there any questions in regards to the wage change?
Full-time employee wage seems fair.
I think so as well. Again, there's no motion, nothing we have to do with this, it's
No.
just getting discussion, just seeing if there's anybody has any questions. The next is for the management salaries and benefits for 2025 changes. I don't know if everybody has that in front of them as well. Any questions or any concerns or anything like that?
They seem in line also.
I believe so as well. Okay, so then the only other thing that we have is the reappointment of Lauren Haupt to the planning commission for a 4-year term ending October 31st of 28.
I move that we reappoint Lauren Houck to the planning commission for a 4-year term ending in 10/31/28.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstained? Okay, that concludes what I have to do.
Then we'll move on to public works and public welfare.
Hey, roll call, Linda Baleel,
Mike Caulfield. He's here. He's getting tired. Darlene Egger, and myself. And we're all here, and the first thing is a review of the capital improvement plan for budget inclusion, and I will allow Miss Rebecca to discuss that.
Absolutely. So if you had a chance to read over the letter that I put into the front of the proposed budget, I talk a little bit about something new for this year, which is a capital improvement plan. There's a lot of value in having this capital improvement plan, not just so that we can see generally what we plan on doing in terms of capital projects on a piece of paper, but so that we can think about how we're saving money for those projects over time versus getting to a year and then saying, oh shoot, do we have money set aside for that project? And it's not been something that the borough has typically done in the past in a formal document. Usually it's been just sort of considered and thought about in terms of making sure that we were generally thinking about it. But it also helps us really to think about it in terms of the budget and not think about it as a separate thing. The capital improvement projects very much should be part of the budget, and we should be thinking about how much money we need to be thinking about setting aside in our accounts to prepare for these projects. We are not unique in that our infrastructure is aging just like everybody else's. And we want to be in a position that we can pay for projects when the time comes. The CIP that I presented for you all this year is a 5-year CIP plan. And you'll see on it that I've broken it out in a couple different ways. You'll see it broken out by the area that it falls into, streets, parks, police, etc. The type of project, the project name, and then the estimated year, so that we can think about what we're planning for next year, the year after, the year after. The overall total estimated cost, obviously, for some of the things that are 4 years out, that's a little harder to say, but what we estimate, and then where that money is actually coming from. And then that puts us down at the bottom to look at, okay, that's the amount that we need to be saving in those funds for the next couple of years to be able to pay for these projects. I bring it forward to the Public Works Committee for discussion, as a lot of these items would be items that would be coming to Public Works for approval. And all of the items that you see on here that are listed as happening or as intended to happen in 2025 have been written into the budget. And then it's the items that are then in those years coming forward that we would be intending to save for. So we're happy to take any questions. I do have everybody here, Les, Kyle, the chief, obviously, if questions are about specific projects, but I would like to make this the way that we do budgeting going forward for capital projects, that we have it listed out in this way as part of the budget, and that this capital improvement plan continues to involve the next 5 years, so that we are thinking about how we are putting that money aside, especially in years when things happen. COVID surprised us all, but our infrastructure continues to age, whether there's a pandemic going on or not, unfortunately. So we need to think about how are we making sure that this money is set aside so that in a year that things aren't good, we can still make sure that our sewer infrastructure is good, our street infrastructure is good, that our police vehicles are able to be driven, things like that. So I think there's a lot of value in having a formal CIP. And I hope that you all see the same.
I agree with you 100%. I know that we don't have to take an action on this, but I think that making this part of the budget is a very good way to go with this, and I think the committee would probably agree with that.
Yeah, I think so too. It's an easier way to keep track, to
Yeah.
know what's going in which box, so to speak.
I'm a little bit in shock because it's so well organized.
I really like spreadsheets.
Okay, so anyone from the committee have any questions for Rebecca about this? Okay, then I think we're all in agreement about moving forward with it the way you have presented it. And the next item under public welfare, discussion of limited commercial overlay district ordinance draft. That's a mouthful. Would you like to speak to that?
Sure, absolutely. So, this ordinance, this is an overlay district ordinance. It's similar to our traditional neighborhood overlay district, and other overlays that we have here in the borough. This ordinance came out of a recommendation from the comprehensive plan. The planning commission has been working with consultant Charlie Schmiel of URDC to take that recommendation from the comprehensive plan and put it into an actual ordinance. They completed their work on it in April. Our solicitor did provide comments back on the ordinance, and Charlie did have to make edits to that. We've unfortunately been waiting a while to get that version back from Charlie, but we did finally receive it. And I just want to note that it's an optional overlay district for a very small piece of the borough, mostly for the area down on George Street, right near where the Sugar Bowl is, and then there's another little section.
James and Frederick.
James and Frederick, yeah.
Yeah, another little section over there. And with last year's zoning hearing board decision on 108 North George Street next to the Sugar Bowl, I'm not sure that staff can fully confirm the usefulness of the ordinance. If council wants to move forward with it, it may help offer revitalization options for these spots in the borough to bring more business growth while maintaining the historic features. But that's absolutely up to council how you feel about it. But the draft ordinance as you see it today is probably as close to final as it would get.
Just for clarification, and I'm not on the committee, if I recall, the zoning hearing board decision on 108 North George Street confirmed it agreed, the zoning hearing board agreed with the historic commission that property should not be torn down, and it was a class 2 property. I also recall that council at one point was told that there would be a lawsuit that we were going to, our zoning hearing board was going to be sued by the owner of 108 North George Street, and that we all voted to fight against that lawsuit. Am I correct in that?
That's right. They did drop it.
They dropped it.
I know they dropped it, but we were at that point very much in agreement that we were going to fight to defend that decision. So I just want to make sure that I remembered that correctly.
Thank you, Mary Ann. Then I would like to make a motion to advertise the draft ordinance to amend the Millersville Borough zoning ordinance to create a new LCO limited commercial overlay district that would apply generally along portions of the east side of George Street, north of James Street, to include 3 lots north of Normal Street, and to include adjacent lots along both sides of East Frederick Street. And then this will come out for future adoption by council. So it would come to council out of committee. So I've made the motion for the committee.
Good question.
Yes.
Have the people there been notified of possible ordinance?
They were, as far as I'm aware, involved. This process started before I got to the borough, but I believe that they were involved when the concept moved from being a comprehensive plan idea to being a planning commission project.
Were they informed, however, not just, given the opportunity to become involved? There's a big difference. So if you're making a change in any kind of zoning to a person's property, it probably would behoove you to give them notification.
That is a requirement for a zoning ordinance once you all would choose to advertise for it. But I will note this is an optional overlay. No property owner currently would have to do anything about it.
Okay.
Yeah, so it is optional.
It still is a courtesy to people. They get excited when
if
something happens.
if council does vote to advertise, then we would follow the regular process of alerting them.
Okay.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, so it's been moved and seconded by Mike, and so this can come to council, because council would need to vote on this, and it would be out of committee. Everyone in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. I think that's all we have for Public Works.
That's all I've got in my agenda. Mr. Mayor, anything for your report?
Nothing this evening from me.
Bless you, sir.
Well. Thank you.
Rebecca?
I'm so sorry. The budget night is gonna be a long night, everybody. Got a big budget. I just have two items. They are relatively routine. The first item is a discussion and approval of the Winfield at Millersville escrow reduction request. We'd be reducing it by $829,260.58. That would leave their remaining escrow balance at $486,145.82. We recommend approval. Staff recommends approval of this escrow reduction as recommended by our borough engineer after doing their inspection and report. The project is moving along, and the engineer's items have been addressed in the manner consistent with them receiving their some of their escrow back.
In that case, I make a motion to approve the escrow reduction request for the Winfield at Millersville development by $829,260.58, leaving the remaining escrow balance for this project at $486,145.82.
That's so moved.
I'm looking for a second,
Second.
actually. There we go. Very good. Any discussion? I'll have to use this hammer for its second purpose then. In that case, all those in favor indicate so by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you. The second item is an annual item that comes forward. This is discussion and approval of the annual resolution reducing police officers' contributions to the police pension plan for 2025. Council must pass a resolution to reduce the officers' contribution to the pension plan every year. That's a requirement of our plan and a requirement of the arbitration agreement. For 2025, per our arbitration award with the Police Officers Union, they're set to contribute 2.5 of their pensionable wages to the police pension. We recommend passage of this resolution to adhere with the contract.
I move that we approve the resolution reducing police officers' contributions to the police pension plan for 2025 as prepared. Do I have a second?
Second.
Oh, go ahead.
Phyllis got there a little bit ahead of time. Any discussion? All those in favor, please indicate so by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Abstentions? Very good. In that case, I would like to move that we adjourn as of 7:39 p.m. Do I have a second? That moment of hesitation.
Everybody else has to take it, I think.
Don't all yell at once.
All those in favor of adjournment, please indicate so by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Abstentions? We stand adjourned.
Make sure Marion gets here on Thursday. It's 7 o'clock. 6 o'clock Thursday. It's just for her committee.
Yep, just for the finance.
Okay, but my wife will be working with her at the loft in the afternoon. They get down early, so I'm gonna have her drive her.
Okay. Got it. Let me know. That's up to you. I'll make it. I don't have nearly as much presentation as I did tonight. Just finance, 6 o'clock here. Finance only.